The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like expecting the leadership of a team captain on the football field, but getting a sea captain. You wouldn't settle for just anything for your team. Shouldn't it be the same for your insurance? So don't settle for just any insurance when you can go with a leader. State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the Podcast. And because we keep glancing at the Premier League table and see us sitting pretty in joint 6th, and there's a distinction, not 7th, we're joint 6th after 4 games on 7 points from 12, which by the way is 1 more than Manchester City, 2 more than Newcastle, 3 more than Manchester United, and 4 points above the bottom 3. So I thought those were good reminders at this point. So you will forgive us for talking more about how it's a case of so far so good this season. So to help me talk about all of this and more, I have Martin Wanless with me. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Chris. It's certainly a nice number of things to talk about. And if we have those points stats remaining at the end of the season, I think we'll all be pretty happy, wouldn't we?
Well, I'd take being above those 3 teams. Maybe not Man United, because you never know where they're going to finish, actually. but they're second bottom. We might need a bit of a gap. But anyways, but it's not a bad feeling looking at the table at the minute, is it?
No, it's good looking. I think it's that balancing act, isn't it, where you're keeping your feet on the ground, but you can't help but get a little bit excited because we've made a great start to the season, points-wise. There's been some areas for improvement. And this is a new group of players who logic says will only get better and better as the season progresses, as they get used to each other. So, look, there's an awful lot to be positive about once again. And as long as it is, that's all good.
Yeah, we can all dream, Martin, can't we?
Certainly can.
That's what football's all about. But look, as I said, when I introduced Jeff Brown at the weekend, we always like someone on the podcast who knows their stuff to put us right on everything. So to help me and Martin, we have a very good friend of the pod and a voice that is synonymous with all things Sunderland, because we're joined by BBC Radio Newcastle's Nick Barnes. Hello, Nick.
Hello. I'm wondering why you've asked me now. Following on from Jeff Brown, that big build-up. Yeah, excellent. I mean, echoing what Martin said, what a start, and nice numbers as well that you were reeling out. So all very, very good, all very, very positive. Someone gave me the stat before the weekend that after, I think it's 10 games, if you've got 11 points, no team has ever been relegated. Someone amended that on X at the weekend and said that actually it's an 85% chance of staying up. And I thought, well, look, I'll take that. That is a very, very good percentage figure. And Sunderland, after 4 games, are only 4 points shy of that total. So that is a very, very good positive to take as well. And the fact they've got Manchester United to play in a few weeks' time, probably the good time to play them, because they're still trying to find their feet this season. Sunderland have clearly found their feet to a degree because they've started so well. So there's a lot of positives from the opening few games of the season.
Yeah, great stats until someone comes along and says they're wrong and changes them again.
Yeah.
But I was teasing some Ipswich Town fans that a good mate of mine saying how many games it took them to get 7 points this season, which I think was about 19 games. But we'll come back onto the positivity in the football side, because we caught up with you after the Burnley game. That was the last time we spoke to you. Martin and Gav touched on this a bit, actually. But you've had a couple of home games now, and we talked to a couple of people. But I'm just wondering how the chaos is going in terms of the global coverage. Like, you've got to share your space now. Like, you could lounge out in the Sunderland press room in previous years, and now you're stuck for space.
Well, it's certainly different in that respect. Well, the funniest was the Brentford game. There were more Brentford media staff, I think, than the rest of the media put together. Every other person that seemed to come through the media doors was working for Brentford. And I was chatting to someone at Palace about this at the weekend, and they were absolutely mystified as to what the Brentford media team do, because they said they only produce one video a week. So there is a mystery surrounding why Brentford have got a coachload of media, because they overwhelmed the press room at the Stadium of Light for that game. And look, it's great. I think one of the positives about being in the Premier League is the global attention the club's receiving, because as a consequence of the club receiving that attention, it means the city and the regions receiving that attention as well, and put Sunderland on the map. It's it's going back in time, showing my age. It's that old thing about, if you weren't on the Pools coupon, it was a bad thing for your town, because being on the Pools coupon and having your name read out at 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon on Grandstand put you on the map, and people wanted to know who you were, where you're from, and so on. This is the equivalent, isn't it? It puts you on the map, because when you drop back into the Championship, as you alluded to there, you could stretch out in the press room, put the umbrellas up, have a few cocktails, and it'll be a week or two before someone passed through. So the difference in media coverage is phenomenal. There's a chasm. You just don't get any coverage at all when you drop out of the Premier League, relatively speaking. But once you're in the Premier League, everyone's all over it.
Yeah. And we talked to Simon O'Rourke and Andy Sixsmith recently about things behind the scenes on that front. And they both said and agreed that the club's done a lot of work, and they really seem to have a handle on things in terms of making that step up.
Yes, and hats off to them. I think they had to do it in a short space of time as well, from that date at Wembley, and suddenly it dawned on everybody, you've got only a couple of months to completely rebuild, if you like, the football club, literally, in terms of the demands that the Premier League put on clubs. The handbooks, apparently, that the Premier League hand out, they're basically the size of 2 or 3 Bibles. And the number of hoops that the club has had to jump through to get everything in place, including the size. I mean, it's literally things like the size of the dressing rooms. And if the dressing room is 5 inches too small, you had to get it rebuilt. You had to get those 5 inches replaced. You just basically had to expand it. And if there's any quibbles from the clubs in terms of, well, really, do we really have to? Yep, that's why we're giving you all this money. So, there are demands. The club have met them. They've stepped up to the plate. I mean, you wouldn't believe the chaos behind the scenes, if you like, at the stadium just days before the West Ham game, with decorators, builders. You had walking in on the Thursday. I thought, there's no way this is going to be ready for Saturday, but they got it done. And now the media room looks fantastic. The media theatre next to the press lounge is phenomenal. So, yeah, hats off to them. They've pulled out all the stops and brought the stadium back into the 21st century. Because I think we'd all accept it was starting to look shabby. It was starting to need work. It was showing its age. And now I think, again, everyone can be proud of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to listen to that, isn't it, Martin? Because we always just look at the football side and look at the outside of the ground, and they're giving it a clean and something like that. And of course, in my mind, in your mind, I suppose, Martin, the Stadium of Light's all brand new and it's only been open 2 minutes. But it's fascinating to listen to the amount that goes on behind the scenes that we've had to actually get done this summer.
Oh, it is. And when Nick was talking there, it reminded me. In a previous life, I used to work for an NRL club over here in Australia, doing an awful lot of the off-field stuff. And even with the NRL, the amount of rules and regulations we had to abide by and be guided by, even in terms of what the website that we had looked like, how we could communicate with the outside world, what we had to do in terms of interviews, pre-match, post-match, all that sort of stuff. All that sort of thing, happened to kind of give me flashbacks and cold sweats and waking up in nightmares about certain stuff, So I can only imagine in the Premier League it's like that, but times a million because of the global spectacle that the Premier League is. So,
well, I was shown sorry, Martin, I was shown a spreadsheet end of last season, actually, when the club were preparing the possibility of going up. So they were trying to get the last month or two of the season. What they tried to do was get the players into the mindset of doing lots of interviews and trying to set the club up as if it was a Premier League club for post-match interviews and get Regis Debris used to doing as many as there are occasions, I think it's somewhere like Liverpool, you can do as many as 18 post-match interviews because of all the foreign broadcasters. So they was trying to get Regis and the players accustomed to doing lots of interviews. And they showed us the spreadsheet of Manchester City and Chelsea and all the players and all the interviews they were having to do. And it was mind-boggling, the numbers of interviews that players were having to do. And they were trying to make it fair and make sure that, one player, I suppose in our situation, it would be Granit Xhaka, isn't overburdened because he'll be the one that's in most demand from foreign broadcasters, trying to spread out all the interviews amongst the whole squad. But it was mind-boggling, the degrees you had to sort of, it was like, my head was addled looking at it because it looked to me like arithmetic and maths, and that is just not my field of expertise. And so all that is going on at the same time, which we don't see. It's this sort of it's invisible to everybody, because all we see really is the football fixture this weekend is this. We turn up, we do our interviews, we trundle home. But at the same time, there's all this going on around us in this huge bubble, if you like.
I think there's a lot of stuff that, as fans, you turn to the ground, you see improvements, right? You see things that are going on. You notice certain things that have happened, whether the concourse has been done up, there's new bars, there's beers being served automatically or whatever it is. But there's so much like that. That's just the very top of the surface. There's so much stuff goes
Where
on.
are those
underneath.
automatic beers? I'm missing out on something here.
Well, as I've been told anyway. But look, there's so much stuff that goes on underneath that we just don't. We see a lot of it, but we don't even think about. And it takes so much incredibly hard work to actually get done. Like, I'll give you an example of again over with the club I was working for over here in the NRL, which is the National Rugby League. And look, you get crowds of 25,000. So it's not 5,000, but it's not on the scale of the Premier League. But even the shirt sponsors, right? So you have all the different positions on shirt sponsors. The amount of work that goes into getting the right sponsor for that, and then the obligations that you have to deliver for those sponsors is immense. But it even goes so far as like on the arms, the shirt sleeve sponsor, the angle that sponsor has to be placed at, and it's actually slightly rotated to the front, because on camera, when your player's going in, they don't actually want the sponsor the sponsor's logo in the center of the shirt. They want it slightly rotated around the front, so it's visible on pictures and shots and on TV and all that sort of stuff. So there's all of these little tiny things that you just don't know, you just don't pay attention to. That, as you say, like some of those things will be applicable in the Championship, but once you get into the Premier League, as you've alluded to, Nick, like there's so much stuff that the club will have to do, and the amount of work that'll needed to have happened over the summer that we just take for granted. Like, I started working in sport, and I thought, like, my thing was, it doesn't really matter what goes on the pitch. If you got a winning team on the pitch, everything will be fine. And look, I still think to some extent that's true. But I think a winning team on the field masks a lot of things that don't happen on the field, off the field. And you've got to get all those off-field things right to build a successful club.
And it's interesting that, talking about the Premier League and the NRL and everything that goes on behind the scenes, the stadium has now got where the press box used to be. You may remember down behind the dugouts. There's now there's a little section of press seats. They look like press seats. They're Premier League observer seats. So you have Premier League observers at games now, and you have of course, you have the phalanx of TV people, producers, and you might have seen Kieran Brady on a match day, because he is the match day, effectively the producer down pitch side to make sure all the timings and everybody's where they should be. So you've got a whole phalanx of TV crews and cameramen and people and foreign TV crews. And this whole, you're bussing in lots and lots of officials from the Premier League and whoever else, Premier League referees, observers, and so on and so on. So along with getting promotion to the Premier League, along with that comes this huge entourage of what we would probably call hangers-on, because ultimately, what is their jobs? What are they doing? But that is part of the Premier League package. That's, there's a lot of the money invested in that, in the Premier League is just mind-boggling. It's, is extraordinary.
Yeah, we talked to Kieran Brady about that, him being the star of Match of the Day when he was on the telephone on there, and we called him out for not tripping over a few of the Brentford players when they were on the way out. By the way, Martin, I suppose it's worth mentioning at this point that this episode of How the Podcast is brought to you in association with the very good people at NordVPN.
It is. And Chris, I don't know how much you know about VPNs and all that sort of stuff, but I use NordVPN quite a lot. Travel about the place for work, and obviously being over here in Australia, coming back home every now and again to catch up with the friends and family, go to the match, that sort of thing. NordVPN's been a bit of a lifesaver for me, because I'll tell you for why, Christopher. I'll tell you for why. I'm always a bit dubious about connecting to the public Wi-Fi, especially when you go abroad. I know there's probably nothing wrong with it, but you want to be on the safe side, don't you? And with NordVPN, you can just connect to a private network with one click, or you can even set it to auto-connect, and you've got your cybersecurity and your privacy and all that sort of stuff sorted, so you can browse the internet and you can feel pretty secure about it all. But you know what? It's not just about the security. And I'll give you an example. A few months ago, I was traveling home. I had a few hours in Singapore airport, and we were playing last season. And obviously, the stream of the games over here, I'm paying for the streaming service, but I wasn't able to connect to that streaming service that I was subscribed to, being in an airport in Singapore. So I was able to change my virtual location on NordVPN, and the game was on. And I just sat there having a cup of coffee in Singapore airport, watching us.
Yeah. Well, a year ago, I didn't even know about what VPNs are all about, but it was Gav, because he's our IT guru, made sure I was on the case, because like you said, that's not that's the biggest benefit, because I was in Lithuania and had to do exactly the same thing over the summer. Getting access to the stuff you've paid for when you're overseas safely and securely. And you can easily switch your virtual locations to access apps and websites in other countries, and you can use it on up to 10 devices as well. So if you're interested in trying NordVPN, we've negotiated a great deal. Simply go to nordvpn.com/Hawaii, and you'll not only get an exclusive discount, but you'll also get an extra 4 months absolutely free. I mean, you can't beat that, can you? And don't forget, NordVPN offers a 30-day money-back guarantee too. So there's absolutely no risk at all. And I'll give you that address again. It's nordvpn.com/Hawaii. And you'll find a link in the show description notes for today as well. So enjoy that offer on us. We just want to talk about a little bit about that press conference that led up to the Palace game, because I thought that was quite fascinating at times. And you kicked it off by getting the manager's reaction to the transfer window, which I thought was really interesting, because we hadn't really heard him talk much. And during the window, he had a couple of comments and hints that in the middle of the window, he was still waiting for his experience. But you asked him if he was happy. And I think his smile said a lot when he first started answering the question. But he did seem pleased and started talking about that depth and competition he's got.
It's interesting you mentioned his smile again, because we spoke about this the other week. He says more in a smile or a facial expression than he does sometimes in some of his answers. But I think he's pleased. I don't think there's any question that the business that they've done, and there were a few disappointments, because there's one or two deals, obviously, that earlier in the window did fall through. Even when they got almost over the line. But I think the business they did on the final day, because he zeroed in on the final day's business, and I think you look at that business done that day, If those three players alone, I think, were sort of a microcosm of just how successful the window has been. And we saw two of them at the weekend at Crystal Palace. I think it's difficult to judge really either of them. I thought Broby looked a bit out of his depth on Saturday, but I thought Hertrauder looked as though he could. It's interesting that he came on in midfield ahead of Dan Neil and not as a defender. So there's that's an area to sort of ask Regis about. But Traore as well was the icing on the cake, I think, because that from what Christian Speakman told us, that deal was that was not something they had been tracking or looking at doing through the summer. That literally came about in the last couple of days of the window. So that was a real bonus at the end of the window. And it looks as though if you look at his CV and the player that he is and his experience, what a player he could turn out to be for Sunderland this season. So that was a real bonus at the end of the window. But I think, when you go back through the signings from Xhaka right through, look at Mukiele at the weekend again. What a fantastic game he had. Robin Ruffs, 21 years old, rookie goalkeeper, unknown, blinder at the weekend in the Premier League. So I think he cannot be anything but happy with the business that's been done this summer.
Yeah. And Martin, Nick went further in that, asking about that, talking about the versatility of the players that we've signed. And again, I thought his response was a little bit fascinating when he was talking about the fact that we've signed good players and good players can just play, and he wasn't necessarily hung up about their positions because he was talking about them being adaptive to the tasks that he's given them rather than positions.
I think it's becoming increasingly the way in football, isn't it, where you sign players for their ability rather than necessarily their ability to play a position. And I think you look at who we've signed over the summer, and you talked about Mukiele there, and he can play right back or centre back, same as Gertruida, but he came on midfield on Saturday because he could do a job there. Talby can play on either flank apparently. So there's I think Siddiqui had played full back before. He's played centre midfield before. We saw Ronaldo play in the centre of defence in pre-season as well as a left back. And you can actually see him doing the job a little bit further up the field if need be as well. So I think you've got an awful lot of options there, which I think when you're a coach, when you're in Labrissa's position, to have the ability to not only have those players on the bench, but to have the ability to bring them on in different positions, and they know what they are needed to do in each position. It's a really strong hand to play, and it gives you the ability to sort of change things around a little bit in game as well. So look, I think you're going to see players sort of probably focus in one position and major in one position over the course of the season, but chances are they'll be used in other ways depending on how games are going at the time. So look, I think gone are the days really where you've got, apart from goalkeeper obviously, where you've got a player who can only play one position. I think you even look at Trey Hume, right? Trey Hume step in midfield and do a job in there. You play a centre back, you play on the right of a three. I think you've got a whole load of versatility in the squad, and that can only be beneficial, I would have thought.
One of the questions you'd have heard it, I asked him about Masuaku playing as right back for his country, which, because I was under the impression that Masuaku had been signed as a left back. And Regis's answer was, well, good thing he's a right back or something. And I thought, well, that's a bit odd. When I asked him after the press conference, I thought, I just want to clear this up because am I going mad here? Because I was convinced he was signed as a left back. But he said afterwards he's left-footed. He says, yeah, he's left-footed, so it's good that he can play both left and right back. Yeah. So again, it's one of those. But Traore played up front for Burkina Faso last week, and but Sunderland signed him as a winger. So I think that versatility is, and Adingra I think can play both wings, and that's going to be. I think the interesting thing about Reinildo is that it means that when Lefay is fit, he can be accommodated in the team with Xhaka, because Lefay can ostensibly play as a left winger, but what's actually happening is he's moving inside, because Reinildo bombs down that left wing and gets forwards. As Martin said, he likes to get forward. So he's got this ability to mold like plasticine in this squad because it is so flexible.
Yeah, and another bit that he came onto, which I again thought was interesting. And this is a huge word, I think, that Regis Labrie uses in every press conference and talking about, almost when he's talking about the players and fans, he says connections all the time. He says, with everything, he's talking about these connections. And he was talking about the transfer process where he's involved in the analysis and then he makes sure he has the first conversation. He makes sure he welcomes them to the club when they first arrive. And then he said something at the end where he said he also simplifies the game model to them. But he did emphasise how much the part he plays in bringing those players to the club and integrating them into the squad.
I think he's got more influence now than any of the previous coaches under the Kirill Louis-Dreyfus. I think in the past, as Tony Mowbray used to talk about the process, had very little input into. It would be at the end of the process when they'd identified players, and then it was the videos or whatever are brought to Tony Mowbray or whoever was in charge. Do you like this player or do you not like this player? Do we proceed or do we not proceed? Regis Labrie has clearly got a much, much larger handle on who is coming in, what he wants, and much greater say. And I think in terms of the people he's surrounded with now, Florent Gisholfi coming in I think that's very significant. And he introduced himself to us before the press conference last week, and Christian Speakman's spoken about him as well. And just in terms of the sheer amount of work that they've had to do this summer in the Premier League to bring bodies in, they just needed more than him and Stuart Harvey and whoever else to do the work. So Florent Gisholfi's come in with a contacts book, which is, how much is that worth? But Regis is clearly, much, much more involved now than any of the coaches have been in the past, and a much greater say in who comes in and who goes out, and making sure that the players, that the due diligence they're doing on the players is such that they do sit comfortably into his idea of what he wants this team to be. It's interesting too when he talks about the dressing room and who polices it. He doesn't have anything to do. He says, we're going into the dressing room and policing the dressing room, much as Tony Mowbray used to say the same. He let his leaders do that. Granit Xhaka, Luke O'Nien, other experienced players, they police the dressing room and the discipline and that side of things. He polices the coaching. He polices the training pitch. So there's very identifiable areas that everybody's got their jobs to do. And I think from what Luciano Vulcano told us the other week about how Regis works, he took the job here as his assistant head coach, and he'd been offered a head coach role because he was so in admiration of the way that Regis is 100% focused and how much time and commitment he makes to the job to get it right. He's a perfectionist. And Luciano Vulcano, he loves that. That for him as a young upcoming coach, that is what a person to learn from. And Regis Labrie seems to, there's something, he oozes that sort of professionalism, focus, determination, ambition to make sure that everything gets done and everything is right.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the football, Martin, we're taking 6 points from 9 going into the international break. Do you think, in a sense, that almost took the pressure off a little bit as we headed to Palace, which was, on paper, the biggest test of the season?
I'm not sure if it did or not. It's, because you're looking at it in one respect, and you're coming off an away game at Burnley where we hadn't performed well and hadn't picked up points. So, a defeat at Palace would have you got a little bit of concern, I think, coming after that result if we hadn't got a relatively positive outcome from it, because then you start putting pressure on the next run of away games, and that pressure starts to build. So I think it was actually a really important game for us to go and show that Burnley, that performance at Burnley wasn't going to be the normal, and we were capable of doing better than we had done at Turf Moor.
Yeah. I mean, we'll go into the game in a second, Nick, but just in general, you're talking about we've played Burnley and Crystal Palace so far, but do you think there's something we can play on in the psychology of teams who we come up against away from home, where almost the pressure is on them because it's Sunderland who are coming to town, and for at least for a while, we're going to be tagged as that team who came up through the playoffs with a last-minute goal, and we should get 3 points against them.
There's an interesting dynamic, I think, with these away games. I think someone made the point as well with Burnley. Let's not forget, much in the same way as Sunderland's first game of the season was at home against West Ham, and look at the way the stadium reacted to that. Burnley against Sunderland was Burnley's first home game of the season. And so there was a different dynamic for their game. Had we been playing Burnley third or fourth away from home, there might have been a different atmosphere around Turf Moor. But because it was their first home game, that was a part of a factor, I think. And I think Sunderland did play fine in the first half. It was the second half which was poor. But it obviously going away from home then to Palace, and it was almost like we'd had our first 3 games, that little package of games which everybody looked at and said, these are 3 games potentially before the season started that Sunderland could get something from. Well, they have. I mean, they've got, a great sort of points tally from those 3 games. Now we're going into this sort of next little tranche of games, and it's stepped up a level. Crystal Palace have currently got the best record in the Premier League in terms of being unbeaten. Nottingham Forest just changed their manager, and we know all about Forest and how good they can be. Manchester United. So we've got 3 more games coming up, 2 of them away, which are going to be difficult. But what Sunderland are doing is sending out a message now that they're not here to be rolled over. They're not here to have their tummies tickled. They're well organised, they're well coached, and they are a team that teams have got to take seriously. So I think that was an important result of Palace, because I think it sent out a signal. I think that someone said about the West Ham game, well, you played a poor West Ham team. But I said, yeah, but on the other side of that coin is you played a good Sunderland team. And the same goes to Palace. They didn't have Sarr and they didn't have Wharton, but they still had Mateta. They still had other players that could hurt Sunderland. And Ruffs did his job, as Roy Keane always used to say, and Marco said it on Total Sport. He's there. The goalkeeper's there to do a job. And Ruffs did it. He did what he's paid to do, and he did it, exceptionally on Saturday, but he's still doing what he's paid to do, and the defence is doing what they're paid to do. So they're sending out markers, they're sending out signals now that, they're not, this Sunderland team is not as in previous years like Southampton or Ipswich or Leicester, here just to roll over and the home team to collect the points. They're going to make a fight. They're going to make a fist of it. They're going to make a fight of it. And so I think it's been, I think psychologically, it's been quite an interesting start to the season, the messages that Sunderland are now sending out to the rest of the Premier League.
Yeah, it was interesting, Martin, that, Nick's already touched on that first half. But, you've had this international break, you had those 3 games, and now we're playing FA Cup holders, Charity Shield winners, Crystal Palace, and you almost hold your breath and go, right, well, how's this going to go? Is it going to be backs against the wall for 90 minutes? And actually, that first half, it could have went either way. It was just kind of 2 teams almost matching up with each other.
It was. And look, I thought we played well in the first half for a large part of that game. I thought we controlled the ball better than Palace did. I thought we controlled the game better than Palace did. But I think it kind of showed, it reminded, didn't it, just of the quality of the Premier League. There was that one chance that Palace created in the first half where the lad played
nothing.
Well, Trey Hume. So there's 2 aspects to it. Trey Hume gives away the ball relatively needlessly just around the halfway line. So again, in terms of that quality to keep possession and only give possession up if you absolutely force into it, I think there's probably something to learn from that. But he loses possession in a relatively innocuous place on the pitch. It's 10 yards inside the Palace half when they get possession of the ball. They play one pass, and then the lad plays it through, and you've got play a clean through on goal, and he probably should have scored. And I think that pass that they made reminded me of a pass that Lefebvre would make. It's that kind of intelligence of
actually. Just very quickly, it reminded me of the disallowed goal against Brentford where we got done.
Well, it was, very similar in terms of how they just sprang us. And look, we know that Palace would want to do that. Palace were quite happy to let us have possession for some parts of that game so they could try to do that. Brentford similarly wanted us to have possession to do it. And teams that want us to have possession don't really suit us to play against. And there's actually not many in the, we talked about going to Burnley. Burnley were really happy for us to have the ball because they were going to try to do that to us. And I actually think might kick me for saying this in a few games' time, but I actually think we're quite well suited to going away to a number of teams because we can just soak up. And it's not kind of backs to the wall soaking up. It's just controlling the game and looking for opportunities to break when teams get overexcited and try to force it. And I think that's what we'll hopefully see. Certainly Man U. Man U aren't going to just sit back and let us have possession and knock the ball around. They're going to want to come at us. Look, in that first half, I thought we did pretty well, but the most telling thing for me was that the biggest chance that was in the game came to Palace and fell to Palace. And, the second half kind of continued along the same lines for the first half of that second half, for the first 25 minutes of the second half. It was kind of similar. I thought we did really well, controlled the game really well. And, when you get into the closing stages, whether that was tiredness of the international break, whether that was Palace just turning it up because they were trying to push for the winner, or a combination of the two, I don't know. But we kind of seemed to almost retreat for that last 20 minutes and just try to hang on, which is only going to work so many times, I guess.
As a scientist, I can tell you that Sundays are only 24 hours long. But with NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV, you get every game every Sunday all in one place. That's upwards of 30 hours of NFL in one day. How can there be 30 hours in 24 hours, you ask? I have a theory. Magic. New users get NFL Sunday Ticket for 8 payments of $34.50 per month. Sign up at NFLSundayTicket.com. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games and commercial use. Terms and embargoes apply. Availability varies.
Finished training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah. Yeah. And just before that chance, actually, because that was around the half hour, that chance that Martin's just been talking about, Nick. But actually, I saw a bit of an incident that about 25 minutes gone, Siddiqui went down injured. Now, I thought this was because he was getting lumps kicked out of him, by the way, but it wasn't. I don't think it was planned. But I thought this was really kind of interesting because the camera panned on Xhaka and he was surrounded by Sunderland players and he was basically giving the instructions out, pointing left, right and centre. And there was three or four players went over to the manager and he was giving out instructions. But it just seemed interesting that the players, gravitated toward Xhaka on the pitch and the manager at the sidelines. And it was almost that taking stock. But you can, and talk about the press conference, Regis Labrie talked that, Xhaka was this symbol and he sets the standard and he shows out, people out to be successful. And it was just interesting that the players went straight over to him and there was a break in play.
Well, coming back to Xhaka, I mean, he is he is a leader and he's made it quite clear that his intentions down the line is to become a coach. So I think that is all part of his development, if you like. He's come to Sunderland to learn and I think that already the players are seeing that, and the way that he conducts himself with the players at the club is such that they are looking at him almost as an assistant head coach, aren't they? In the same way, he's playing, so he's a player coach, if you like, and he has that much influence within the team and on the pitch. I mean, going back to what Martin was saying about the tactics and the setup, I agree with him. I think the team is set up to soak up pressure. I think the whole basis of the signings in the summer was largely to get experience in at the back, because they knew that they were going to be under a lot of pressure. Teams are going to attack, they're going to put them under a lot of pressure. I have been slightly concerned that in each of the games, pretty much, I think so far, they've been caught once or twice on the break and they got away with it. They got away. Pino's miss on Saturday was a bad one. He should have scored. I think Brentford had a break like that and scored. West Ham, Bowen had a break like that, should have scored. So 2 or 3 times, Sunderland have been caught by that quick ball through and someone on the break. The other area that slightly concerned me, they did it again on Saturday, was I think it was Alderete, of all the players, who I think is outstanding, gave the ball away needlessly, and it set up a chance for Crystal Palace. You can't do that at this level because you'll be punished. And had it not been for Ruffs being in the form that he was in at Saturday, Palace, Oliver Glasner can quite happily walk away from that game and wonder how he didn't win it 3-0 because they did create the chances. Ruff's pulled off 5 or 6 outstanding saves. So you clearly ride your luck, you make your own luck. But I'm sure, none of us will sit here and think that Sunderland aren't looking at this. They'll be on the training pitch and saying, right, how are we allowing teams to make these quick breaks? We've got to cut that out. We've got to cut out those mistakes, even if they are 10 yards inside our own half, because as Martin alluded to, Enzo Lefebvre is the one player in the Sunderland team who can do that to the opposition. And we're yet to see it this season, but he can do it. And Sunderland are going to try and learn how to do that themselves to opposition teams. But the team's learning. It's only 4 games into the Premier League season, and the chasm, as we've spoken about before, is huge between playing Championship football and Premier League football, and also between those players coming in from La Liga, French League, or wherever they come in from. They've all, by their own admission, saying this is a step up for us. Our ambition was to play in the Premier League, and it is a step up to play at this level, and they're all learning.
Yeah. And another aspect to that, Martin, because I think we'll end up by saying how brilliant Sunderland are, of course, but these little things that I'm sure that they're picking up to work on. Another thing, we've talked about this in previous games, but I think with every game it's becoming more evident that, and Nick again has mentioned that left-hand side. This time it was those triangles between Ronaldo, Adingra and Siddiqui were working wonders down that left-hand side. But we didn't seem to want to put the ball out to the right, Martin. And I've noticed this in the Brentford game, the West Ham game, that everything goes out to the left. Now, I don't know whether that's a partnership still building on the right, or whether Talby's still raw, or whether it's a tactic to say get everything down the left.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I think after the Brentford game, I was kind of the opinion it was a tactic, and it either happened just naturally, or we were playing that flank because we spotted the weakness, and potentially we were in the Brentford game. I know one of the lads who was playing for Brentford on the right-hand side, so obviously the side that we were attacking down, used to play for Le Briss at Lorient. So I had a suspicion that he'd maybe kind of spotted something there and was trying to isolate him or something like that. The fact that it's obviously happened again at Palace, you kind of go, well, is that an accident, or is that a ploy? Or is it by virtue of the fact that we're just not able to do that over on the right-hand side? Now, I actually thought Talby had a better game on Saturday. I thought he controlled the ball well. He got in a few dangerous positions. But he doesn't offer the directness. I think my criticism, if I was going to criticise Talby, is that he plays it safe a lot of the time. He doesn't go and try to drive at the fullback like Adingra would do on the other side. And look, Trey Hume, I love Trey Hume. We've signed Gertruida. I think Larissa said he sees him as a centre-back. Mukheli can play right-back. And both of them have come with a reputation of being very, very good on the ball, very good passers of the ball. Both of them are fast. Both of them are strong. And you kind of wonder whether, before not too long, we'll see one of those two at right fullback. Nick talked before about Traore coming in. We'd be able to get him as, almost like a bonus on transfer deadline day. You might have had to complete 13 or 14 new signings and you get a free Traore, it seemed like. But when you look at him and the player that he is, he's really direct. He'll go for goal. And I think when you've got a team like we have, that, again on Saturday, and look, I think it was a brilliant point on Saturday. You play that game 10 times, we lose the 8 because Palace will put a chance away, right? So I don't think we can kind of take that as a template for going forward. And I think we need more goal threat. And they've obviously signed Broby to provide that from a central position. We've seen what Isidore can do from the bench. Mayenda, I think, is fantastically talented and has huge potential. I said in the summer, I don't think he's the striker to play 38 games in the Premier League. So I think they brought Traore in with some experience, obviously, but somebody who can add goals, who can add a goal threat, who can add a bit of a wild card in terms of our attacking play, because he'll carry the ball and drive upfield. And I wouldn't be too surprised to say, I think you've got a couple of players who can play right back. You've got an option on the right wing. And I wouldn't be surprised if we mix it up there and try different combinations there over the next few games, just to try to unlock something on the other side. Because what we don't want to do is teams watching the Brentford game, watching the Palace game, going, they come down the left. All we have to do is stop them coming down the left, and they're screwed. And you can kind of see that we have worked on it. It's not necessarily an accident, because you've got Siddiqui dropping in to cover Ronaldo pushing up. And I kind of liked it more against Brentford than did against Palace, because then that frees up Lafay to go and cause some havoc. And I like that. I don't think it worked as well on Saturday, because then everything kind of goes down the line. You're almost doubling up down that flank. It becomes probably easier to defend against compared to when Lafay is drifting around and trying to make things happen. But look, it's certainly one to watch. And I think if we see the same again against Villa, then you're kind of going, oh, I wonder how we're going to kind of mix things up, because I think we do need to vary it a little.
The other thing that was funny at the weekend, because we didn't know who knew that McKaylee had a long throw. So I spoke to him afterwards and said, seems to be a bit of a thing now, the long throw. Watching Match of the Day that night, what pops up? Mark Chapman saying, well, there's a bit of a thing now going on about long throws. And I thought, well, yeah, that was very prescient. But it's true. McKaylee said, yeah, nobody knew I had. And so I had that in my locker. But he has, teams are now using that's become a thing. Sunderland brought the advertising boards in against Brentford because they knew Brentford had a player with a long throw. Now Sunderland have been, the markers out there, they've made it clear. McKaylee's got a long throw, and they're using it. Teams are using this now as a weapon.
Yeah, I'm glad we've learned from the Rory Delap debacle that we actually find the player who's got the throw in rather than let him go. But yeah, Nick, on that second half, I thought we had a 15, 20-minute period where we did really well to take the sting out of the game a little bit without creating anything, but we slowed it down. But then that last 15, 20 minutes, we just retreated a little bit. Now, do you think that was a consequence of running out of steam, or just the manager's instructions to say, right, let's drop 10, 15 yards and let's just keep it a bit tighter?
I think probably a combination of both those things. I was heart in mouth I was dreading the board coming up, and it was going to be something like 8 or 9 minutes, because I was just sensing that the longer the game went on, the chances of Palace scoring were probably increasing. And I was fearing that they were going to win the game 1-0. It just had this sort of creeping sort of fear towards the end, with the pressure that Palace were putting on, that something was going to go in. I think partly it's that old adage that coaches will tell you, once the players are out on the pitch, there's a limit to how much they can control, and it's largely down to the players on the pitch to organise themselves and to make sure that they've all got a job to do and they know what they're doing. And credit to Palace, they made changes that heap pressure on Sunderland, Uche coming on and so on. And I think Devaney, Uche, they all made a difference, because they suddenly, they were throwing bodies into the Sunderland box. So I think to a degree, Sunderland were being forced back and were trying to find a way out, which is why I think Petrardo came on in midfield I know he's a centre-back, but he's big and he's strong, somehow just to try and stem that flow from midfield from Crystal Palace. So I think it's something they'll learn from. I think, they're going to have to weather this, because other teams will. I think Martin alluded to Manchester United. They're not going to sit back and let Sunderland have the ball. They're going to attack. So they're going to have to get used to defending. And I think, they've got accomplished defenders in there. There's no question. I mean, Alderete, Mukiele, Hume, Reinildo. It's a very good back four. Behind them, they've got Robin Ruff. So they are more than capable of soaking pressure up. But I think part of it as well is they've got to learn how to break out from defence, if you like. Don't give the ball away in silly positions. And they need an outlet. Lafay, I think, it was missed at the weekend. And I think that whole business about Sunderland playing down the left was partly because Lafay had played there the week before against Brentford. And there seemed to be a bit of a hangover from that at Palace, and not going down that right-hand side. Or the irony is that Talby probably had the best Sunderland chance of the afternoon. So, yeah, it's work in progress. And I think, they'll be well aware that, key is getting players like Lafay, and I think at some point Traore on the pitch, because I think they're players that can unlock defences. And if you've got players like that on the pitch, it means the opposition have got to be wary about themselves throwing everybody forwards. But I did think it was still quite interesting towards the end of the game that when Palace had set pieces, they were still leaving 3 players out in midfield and not putting them all in the penalty area. So they were obviously mindful that Sunderland had a threat on the break.
Yeah. And Martin, we've mentioned these three, but it's worth kind of putting it to you just about that the three players at the back who really kind of stood out, I think. And you've got Mukiele and Alderete, 27 years old, 28 years old. That's where we've brought in the experience, and we talk about that. But Robin Roof's behind them, 22 years old. If you look at the money that's been spent on goalkeepers over the summer by some of the big sides, looks like we've got an absolute bargain there, doesn't it?
Well, it's on the evidence so far. We've got a steal of the century, haven't we? Because he's been. We know what it is, right? He does everything you'd want a goalkeeper to do, and makes it look easy. He comes out and gets crosses. He's in the right place to.
Well, just quickly, that one he took in the wind and the rain, where most keepers would have punched that because they were worried. He just took it like it was no problem and caught it.
No, exactly. And the saves that he made on Saturday as well were fantastic. And I think there's some of them that you probably look at in first glance and go, "Oh, just hit him," or he's just in the right position. But even that one that he gets with his shoulder, I think with Shea Given a match of the day, it was like he's moved his shoulder to save it. That's not just he's there and he's hitting him. That save he made, no doubt was right, was fantastic. And I think you can go through the three games that we've picked points up in, and he's actually played a big role in each of those games. He's saved, he saved a penalty against Brentford. He's pulled off saves against West Ham. He's pulled off saves against Palace. And he has been, I think it's fair to say, he's been the most impressive of the pre-season signings so far. He's been the player who's just come in and has owned it completely. Jacques has done similar in midfield, but I guess Roofs has had the opportunity to prove his talent in a more sort of demonstrable way. But I just think he looks the full package. And, you're hesitant to say it too loudly because he's a young keeper, isn't he, right? So he's a young keeper, and there will be mistakes in this season. I don't think anybody's expecting him to go through a season of perfection. It's not going to happen. But for a player who's played one full season of first-team football, he's been called up to the Netherlands squad. He's took to the Premier League like a duck to water, and even in his interviews, he comes across experienced, composed, but not like overawed by anything. He's just down to earth, and he's doing a good job. He's vocal, and I think we would quite rightly laud Anthony Patterson for his save in the playoff final, which got us that opportunity. But on the evidence you've seen of Roof so far, he is a major step up from what we had in goal last season. So I think he's been fantastic.
Yeah. And on the topic of the substitution that you've mentioned, Nick, when Siddiqui came off, Gertruda came on, just as part of the wider question, because again, it was brought up in the press conference that Regis Labrie was asked, how does he manage this situation where so many players, and Anthony Patterson's one of them as well, that, Dan Neil hasn't had a minute of Premier League football yet. Club captain last season, brought us up from League One, the Championship. But he talked about having conversations with them to make them aware and to trust the process, make sure everyone's involved in the project. And he raised the examples of Enzo Lefebvre and Isidore, who weren't in the team to start with and forced their way in. But, you saw the comments from Alan Brown, and, you can see all these things outwardly, but players aren't going to be happy with not playing, are they?
I think it's difficult, and I feel for Patterson and Neil. Saw them come off the pitch at the end on Saturday after the warm down, and you can just get a sense, that they feel a little bit isolated at the minute and not looking likely to get minutes anytime soon. And that must put them in a difficult position. But certainly a player like Dan Neil, who made the decision to stay because it's his boyhood club. He's a Sunderland fan. He wants to play in the Premier League. But you do wonder, and he must have been sitting on the bench on Saturday and thinking, when Trouder went on in that position, in his position, where his future lies this season in terms of minutes, because the centre half is getting on ahead of him in his position. That certainly would, if you were him, it would raise questions in your own mind about where you are at the moment. Regis was, I suppose, his answer was confident, and he says he's dealing with it. And I think so far we've learned to trust him when he talks about situations, such as last season when they weren't winning games, he said, look, it will be fine. And in much the same way as at the moment, he's saying, look, trust me, it'll be fine. These players will get their time. They will get their moments on the pitch. And I suppose you look to December, January, African Cup of Nations, and wonder if that's the opportunity some of these players may benefit from, players going away for that competition. Injuries, suspensions, they will all rear their head at some point. So they may well get a chance. It was interesting too that Luke O'Nien was at the Palace game on Saturday. Clearly wasn't going to play because that was never in the on course for him to play this weekend or last weekend. But he was there, and he's clearly there because of his influence in the dressing room and integrating him within that squad. So I mean, I'm sort of in a situation, in a position where I think I'd rather have those players at the club, even if they're not necessarily playing at the moment, because it means you've got strength in depth. And the one thing we've spoken about this season is that they're going to need strength in depth. You're going to need bodies, and they had to sign 14 players because that squad needed it. It needs that quality and that depth if it's going to succeed this season. So I think these players will just have to be patient, bide their time, and we have to trust Regis de Vries that he is talking to them, he is reassuring them that they have got a role to play and that they are being involved, if you like, and they are his connections, as he says it, that they feel connected. And I think at this moment in time, early on, we've got to trust that that's happening.
Yeah, he absolutely loves talking about those connections in his press conferences. But Martin, just one thing I loved about the comments after the game was Glasner talking about being surprised at how physical we were, and I thought that was great to hear, really reassuring, because one of the worries is, and I think Jeff Brown talked about almost some players have got that championship physique and they look different to Premier League players. But you looked at the players on the pitch and how we hunted in packs. And we did look physical, and against Palace, who were one of the biggest sides in the Premier League.
No, that's absolutely right, and it's been reassuring, I guess, hasn't it, to see that physicality for ourselves. And when the signings were coming in during the summer, I was kind of looking at the heights of players, and we haven't necessarily signed tall players as such, but we've signed really athletic and strong players, and the amount of space that the likes of Siddiqui and Diarra cover, the amount of ground that they cover during the course of the game, which is great for Xhaka, because Xhaka can kind of sit there and almost direct them to do that. They'll hunting packs over there. But they've got the legs around Xhaka, and not necessarily those individual players, but those player profiles have been put together as a three for the centre of midfield, haven't they? You got Xhaka who can sit there and dictate and dominate, and you got legs around them to go and do all of the running, and I think you kind of get the best out of them. But look, it's it was nice to hear that opposing managers seem to think that we have got that physicality to compete, because you see teams coming up to the Premier League, and I know it's dead easy for us to say it right now at this moment, but you see some of the promoted sides over the last few years come up, and we've seen them firsthand, right, play against us, and they've looked great, and then they go into the Premier League and it's like, are you playing the same sport, or are you playing something completely different? Because they have looked miles off the pace in terms of the physicality, in terms of even how they play football and go about playing football. But it's the same at any level to a large extent. You've got to earn the right to then go and play. And I think you do that by doing all of the stuff off the ball and putting pressure on the opposition, all that sort of stuff. So it's good. And look, I was a little bit concerned going into this game because of the amount of travel that the players had done. And I think, again, it might have come back to bite us a little bit in the last 10 or 15 minutes, but I was impressed with how we actually took to that game, because the players didn't look as if they'd been away for the vast majority of it. And that was pretty reassuring, I think.
Yeah, and just to get your final thoughts on the point away from home. I mean, I think it was just I would have snapped your hand off, Nick, before the game for that point. But just in terms of how we played and how we set up, I don't think it's too different to how we set up in the Championship, because for a lot of games last season, we didn't create much, but we ended up getting results. And, you look how many games we won by more than one goal, and I think it might have been 3 or something in total by the end of the season. So I don't think tactically we've actually changed that much. And you could argue that we're actually a little bit suited maybe to to playing in the Premier League that way.
Like you, before the game, I said to so many people travelling down, I'd take a point, and to get a clean sheet with the point as well was the icing on the cake. But I think it's in Regis de Brice's DNA to set the team up like that. I think he did last season, and yes, he did. He'd said, on occasion we'll play 4-4-2, and times during games, sometimes they throw 2 up front, they go 4-4-2, or they change the formation. But in essence, he is the way that he sets the team up, it is familiar, and it's he does it every week. What's unpredictable perhaps is sometimes he throws a curveball in terms of selection. When we expect Mienda to play up front, he throws Isidore in at Palace or whatever. Lefay starting against Brentford. So he keeps his cards very close to his chest when it comes to not letting the opposition have any clue as to who's going to play. But I think the opposition, they'll all do their homework, will pretty much know how they're going to play. It's just a question of who's going to be doing it. But I think he's very comfortable in his own skin in the way that he sets the team up. And like any coach, he'll vary it, because you've got to have variation. I mean, you can't just solidly say this is the formation, it's going to stick to that, because sometimes it has to be horses for courses, and you have to change in a game. But I think pretty much we know all the time. You can write down on the piece of paper, you won't, as I say, you won't necessarily know what the personnel is to a degree, although the back four's picking itself at the moment, and he's saying it deserves to. But you'd have to you put X in the slots, but you know what the formation is going to be. And he did that, as you say, pretty much all through last season, and it worked. I mean, the proof in the end is in the pudding. But I mean, they also have this sort of charmed sort of life in a way. I mean, I go back to the 2 semi-finals and even the final of the playoffs. Coventry City were by far and away the better team in the 2 semi-finals, and Sheffield United could have been 2-0 up and out of sight. And yet somehow Sunderland find a way. I mean, I think this is something that Regis de Brice has managed to inject into this squad, is they always find a way. Whatever the circumstances they find themselves in, they're finding a way. And that I don't know. Can you coach that? Can you put it in the coaching manuals? I don't know, but that's how Sunderland are living life to a degree. I just think you look at the weekend, and I thought about Burnley. And they've had 2 results, which if you were a Burnley fan, you'd just be crying in your tea, because they've obviously done well, but conceded 2 late penalties and lost 2 games against Manchester United and Liverpool. And you think, whoa, but Sunderland don't. Sunderland have that, that cliche till the end, but they do seem to have something in their DNA, which is only, I think, as a result of the way that Regis de Brice and his coaching team have coached this team.
Yeah. When you have so many years of not getting the rub of the green, Nick, then the likes of Idiak Pai scoring against you when he hadn't scored for 10 years or whatever it was, and then he scores against Sunderland. It's about time we got a bit of rub of the green. But next 3 fixtures, Martin, as Nick said, Villa at home, Forest away, Man United away, and they've all got their problems. Is it difficult not to get a little bit carried away?
It probably is. I'll just go back to a little thing Nick said about Coventry being by far the better size in the 2 semi-finals. I
could see his face when you were saying that, Nick.
I would argue vehemently against that, but that's probably another podcast. Look, I think, what was the question again? What we think about the upcoming
not getting carried away.
Not getting carried. Yeah, look, I think as we've said in pretty much every podcast that we've done covering the game so far, they've all actually been relatively similar, and we've actually turned in pretty similar performances, and each game could have gone either way. There hasn't been a game, I don't think, even the West Ham game, where you go, we really deserve to win that, or we really deserve to lose. I think I said earlier that the Burnley game was a disappointing performance. I think it was to some extent, because we didn't do the things as well as we could do, and the result was obviously disappointing. But when you actually break the performance down, and you said before, Chris, it's the little moments that have kind of made a big difference. So I think we are very much a work in progress. I think we'll have learned an awful lot from the Palace game, because, as Nick said, these shortcomings that we showed against Palace will not have gone unnoticed by the coach and staff. They will be on it more than we are. They'll have noticed other things that we haven't noticed about the game. And they'll be working on it all together. And, I think I made the point the other day that this run of fixtures that we've had at the start of the season, it could have been disastrous for us, because if we got beaten or turned over in the first 2 or 3 games, then the pressure's well and truly on for the rest of it. But as long as we keep picking up points here and there, we're actually, every sort of tranche of fixtures, we're stepping up in quality. So we've got this nice little run now. We go, okay, we've passed that test. We go on this next test, started at Palace, and we've picked up a point, and things weren't perfect. We got a point. There's things for us to learn. And we'll take that now into Villa. And, I think if you looked at Villa's scoring record in the Premier League previously and look at who they've got coming up in the next game, you kind of go typical Sunderland, you know what's going to happen, the writing's on the wall. Hopefully it's different. And you kind of get a sense that things are different to what they used to be. Even that determination, that grit to go right to the final whistle, to get something out, to make sure that we'll get something out of it again, it is clearly evident. So I think there's so much stuff that we can look forward to. And look, this is the first week that the manager will have had all of the new signings, with 3 deadline day signings, in training all week. Be able to work on things. You'll be able to integrate, Broby and Traore and Geertruida a bit more than they have been integrated already. So look, I think it's going to be another really good test to see where we are. And again, Villa, put the scoring record to one side. They haven't looked as good as they did last season. I think I've seen them play 2 full games and the highlights of the other games that they played. And I don't think they've looked great. They looked a little bit laboured and a little bit, it's kind of struggled to really get going. So it could be a really good game for us to have. If the atmosphere is good, the crowd's up for it and all that sort of stuff. And then you go into the games that follow that before the next international break. Forest away under a new manager. How's Ange going to try to sort of set Forest up? Is he going to try to get them to change the playing style completely? Or is he going to try to maintain what Nuno was doing? Because it's a very different style of play that Postecoglou's kind of famous for to what Forest have been playing. So how's that going to work out? And then you got Man U after that. And you've got all that narrative about Amorim and whether he'll still be there. If he's still there, will he kind of need that game to stay there? I read something about Benfica wanting them this morning, which could give him a nice, easy exit out of that situation for everybody concerned. But you look at each fixture, and again, somebody might replay this in 3 weeks' time and go, you're a dickhead, shut up. But I'm not scared of any of those 3 games. I'm going, we can get something there. We can get something there. We can get something there. And I think there's actually 3 great opportunities for us to pick up points. And look, if we get to that 3-game run that we've got now with another 4 or 5 points, brilliant. Like, what a start to the season that would be. So I think, it's all looking good as far as I'm concerned. If we can just keep incrementally improving every day, every week that we have, every match, it's... And like some of the players, right? So I'm clanging on now. So like you got the likes of Diarra, right? Diarra, record signing. In little flashes, he's looked good. He's not really knitted the performance together. Talby, the same. Siddiqui's showing a bit more, but again, you kind of look at Siddiqui and go, there's more to come from him. And you've got all of these players who you kind of are just bubbling under, and you think there's an awful lot more to show. And if 2 or 3 of them can start showing 30, 40, 50% more than they have so far, like, it could be good, couldn't it? It could be good.
Yeah. I agree with Martin, Nick, that each time I see this side, and this is the last word from you, Nick, about what's coming up, but we've got to remember this is the Premier League. Now, these next 3 games, we could easily go and lose these next 3 consecutively, or looking at our side, you wouldn't be surprised if we got results in all of them.
I think, as Martin said, I think I wouldn't be at all surprised if over the next 3 games they come out with 4 or 5 points, just because the way that the season has started and the way that the team is handling itself. I'd rather be facing these 3 next than Liverpool, Chelsea, Bournemouth, or something like that, because that is suddenly a big step. But and all 3, as Martin alluded to, have all got problems. They've all got issues at the start of the season. So this is a good time. I know it's a cliche, but it is a good time to play them. And I think with Villa being at home, if Sunderland can, if they can have that atmosphere that's being generated at the Stadium of Light this season, they are really, really like a 12th man. I think they really have got behind the team, and they did so at the end against Brentford. It was fantastic to see how the crowd stayed with the team, drove them on at the end of that game. I think, was a big factor in them winning it. And if you can have that atmosphere against Villa, and then that acts as almost the sort of the next platform to bounce off into the Forest and Manchester United games, if they can get a positive result against Villa at the weekend, suddenly that, it is a good, again, look, you break these sections, these season into sections. This is the next one. So if they can, it's almost like, let's start again. If we can get a win on Saturday and Sunday, that's the next point at which we bounce into the next game, into this next section of 3 games. And I think it all looks very positive. I think everyone's very optimistic, and I think the players have got confidence, they have self-belief. We've got players, hopefully Lefay is fit. Players, as Martin said, Diarra, Siddiqui, there's a lot more to come from them. So it's a team that's certainly growing in stature.
Yeah, and I think that optimism is a good place to finish off. And I was also thinking, when Martin was talking, the scenario of Roy Keane being interim manager at Manchester United when we come round to play. And
hey, do you know what? I said that to somebody this morning.
Did you?
I honestly did, because we were talking, right? I went to see me Cairo this morning, had me back cracked, and he's a West Ham fan, so he didn't want to talk about West Ham. He was quite happy to talk about Man United. And we were talking about Amarim, and he was saying, but who do they get in? They've tried everybody. If he goes, who do they get in? I said, I tell you who I would get in for Man U, Roy Keane. Just get them in, sort them out, and set them up. And I tell you what, that would be a story, wouldn't it?
Stranger things have happened, and if it does happen, you heard it here first. Definitely, I don't think anyone else will have mentioned that. But no, that's a brilliant place to end off. So just leaves me to say thank you very much, Martin. Always a pleasure, mate.
Cheers, mate. Good crack.
And Nick, thank you very much for your time. As always, really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Good stuff.
Cheers,
thanks, Nick. And thanks again for everyone for listening. You can head over to the Roker Report website if you want if you want more about Sunderland and all of that's happened over the last week and everything like that. We've got all sorts. We've got historical stuff, everything over there on the Roker Report website. Or if you can wait 24 hours, we've got our next pod that should be dropping, because we've got loads on How We're the Podcast coming up. So look out for all of that, and as well as the build up to the game against Aston Villa this week. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This is Hannah Burner from Giggly Squad. O-Pill is the first over-the-counter daily birth control pill available in the U.S. Let's be real, getting a birth control prescription is not always easy, and it's so much admin. In fact, about a third of women face barriers to access prescription birth control. Between scheduling appointments, missing work, class, or just trying to exist, it's a lot. But now O-Pill is putting birth control in our control. O-Pill is a daily birth control that's FDA approved, full prescription strength, and estrogen free, and 98% effective when used as directed. Grab it online or at most major retailers, no prescription or doctor's appointment needed. So if you're thinking about birth control, check out O-Pill to see if it's right for you. Use code GIGGLY for 25% off your first month of O-Pill at OPILL.com. That's code GIGGLY at OPILL.com. Birth control in your control. We love to see it.